Welcome to
Okay, gentlemen, let's do this again. Alhamdulillah.
welcome
And wrongly labeled as Muslims. This rise, most people had very little knowledge about Islam and seldom heard the word mentioned. But the impact of 9/11 has caused a curiosity to arise in people for various reasons, with one of those being the fallacious desire to understand why and how a religion could cause people to commit murder in the instances of the truth, commit acts of terrorism, or any other type of oppression. Okay, so this is not to imply. Alhamdulillah. So AT&T is messing with me over here, so I'm getting a bad signal, so it's cutting into the video feed. So okay, so assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon everyone who's watching or listening. My name is Kenny Bomer. This is Consider This TV, where truth is made clear from falsehood, and we have a special discussion today between brother Nadir Ahmed and CJ Cox. They're going to be discussing whether or not the Bible is scientifically reliable. Does the Bible contradict science? And so, gentlemen, welcome to the platform. And let me make sure that both of you are off. Your mics are not on mute. Okay, there you go. How you doing, gentlemen?
doing good.
Good. All right.
Thank you. I'm doing very well also.
Good. So yeah, welcome to the platform. Once again, we're having some technical difficulties there at the very beginning, but here we are, and it's a beautiful day, beautiful conversation. Two respectful gentlemen here, so let's proceed. Okay, So obviously, we're going to be talking about whether or not the Bible is in agreement with science. Does it contradict science? We've had many discussions regarding the Quran, and it seems as though the case is settled with the Quran. We've had many people try to make claims against the Quran that, bear with me as I turn my cell phone down, alhamdulillah. We had many people make claims against the Quran that simply haven't stood. So we welcome anyone to come and try to present their case against the Quran. We see a case after case where the Quran is in agreement with science, and it is a book of signs, not necessarily a book of science, but we see that those signs do not contradict science. So we do, the battle's over. The case is closed on that, and I don't know why anyone even attempts to try to undermine the Quran. From the scientific standpoint, when it's not a book of science, but it certainly is a book of signs. Allah says in the Quran that we shall show them our signs within the universe and within themselves, and so they know that this truth is from their Lord. And
well, are there any challengers? Is there any critic or anyone who's willing to challenge at this point?
Brother, if there's some out there, I haven't seen them.
Yeah, they've all pretty much ran away.
It seems like the case is settled. I mean, it's
right. We won the debate.
Yeah, the debate's won. So if there is anyone out there that's willing to or thinks they have a case, obviously these points that have been brought up,
they can contact us, and we'll be more than happy to entertain that. But I don't think they're going to after the defeats they suffered.
Right. No, I totally agree. I mean, we've seen point after point being addressed over and over again, and there's no contradictions with the Quran, and so we'll see what happens with the Bible. We haven't had as many discussions about the scientific nature of the Bible, so this will be a very interesting conversation for everyone involved today. So may our Lord, our God, our Creator, guide us all to the truth and better understanding. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation with you two gentlemen.
All right, shall I just go ahead? I can start with my first 3 minutes. We'll go 3 minutes back and forth.
So I will
let me go start.
Time, at about the 15-second mark, I will make a tapping sound that will indicate that you have about 15 seconds left, and I'll try to give you time to complete your point that you're trying to make. But we are going in 3-minute increments, just to keep everything moving smoothly, give everyone their opportunity to speak. So, Brother Nadir, if you're saying you're going first,
I can go first. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So, Brother Nadir, go ahead.
Okay, nice. Yeah, thank you. Nice meeting you, CJ. So yeah, I guess we're talking about the Bible today, but it looks like when it comes to the Quran and science, Islam has won the debate. We have discussed with many critics. I mean, some of you might have known them, like the names are kind of escaping me here. But we've reached a point where there are no critics, there are no people who you could say skeptics or anybody out there who is willing to challenge the Quran and science. So we've reached a point now where the Quran is unchallengeable. That claim that the Quran is in complete harmony with science, it is indeed unchallengeable. And I want to make sure that in the description of this video, we're going to give you some of those discussions and debates where you can look at that for yourself. But now when it comes to the Bible, we see something drastically different. We see something almost the opposite. And what that is, there are literally no debates other than the ones which I've twisted people's arms to come forward to discuss the Bible and science. What we are seeing is a systematic fleeing from the subject, from scholars, apologists alike. In fact, CJ himself tried to contact David Wood to have just a discussion. We don't want to get into these debates, just a friendly discussion. We want them to be part of the discussion, but they are systematically refusing. And that's something which, and so actually this is kind of what was why we're actually having this discussion with CJ. He's a Christian who believes he can defend the scientific error claims of the Bible. But people like Christian Prince, I think you know who he is, right, CJ? Yeah,
I'm not a big fan of Christian Prince, but
okay, yeah,
I have heard of him.
Okay, virtually everybody, and if you Google that and you try to look for discussions, debate, and challenging the Bible and science, it's very hard to find anything out there. While Quran and science, there's dozens, and Islam has won in spectacular fashion. What I mean by win, let me tell you exactly what I mean by that. Where your opponent basically agrees there are no explicit scientific errors in the Quran, or he basically doesn't have an issue with that statement. So this is something which both Muslims and Christians can agree on. So the first question I have for you, CJ, is what's going on? Why is it that Christians are reluctant and almost the debates on these topics are non-existent? In fact, the last one I had with Kent Hovland, again, I'm twisting their arms, the guy ran away in the middle of the discussion. He said, oh, well, there's a storm happening, and he has to go away when I was cornering him on some of the issues. So tell me what's going on here.
And that was right at 3 minutes. So CJ, go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me here. So there are a few things that I would want to say on that. The first thing is I cannot comment on why other people have decided not to debate Nadir. Me and Nadir are on pretty good terms. We're obviously speaking. We're very gentlemanly towards each other. And so I kind of want to leave it at that. David Wood and Sam Shamoon and all them, they have their own problems with Nadir, and that is their room to speak and not mine. Whether or not they are accurate, that of course is between them and Nadir, and of course between them and God. But I want to try and distance myself a little bit from that. Also, I would like to publicly accept any sort of a debate on the Quran as far as science is concerned. I don't know of anyone besides Jay Smith who was actually debating Nadir on this topic. I do know that David Wood has numerous videos on the topic, though I'm not sure if he's ever done a debate on it. As far as the situation is concerned with scientific errors in the Bible, you brought up Dr. Kent Hovland. Kent Hovland has something like 35, 40 different debates with evolutionary professors talking about the creation evolution issue. I don't think his personal scientific expertise is greater than the creation and evolution issue. I don't know that to be true. It's just I've only ever seen him address those particular issues. But there's something like 30, 35 of those debates in particular. And it seems to be issues outside of evolution versus creation that I wouldn't necessarily say anybody is running away from at this point. It's just that nobody has really addressed it as much. It's one of those issues that is just emerging as far as being a popular issue. And now you're starting to see people actually debate. Of course, Sahih Luke debated Nadir Ahmed, I think 3 or 4 months ago on this topic. Kent Hovland did. You have myself here now, and we'll see what happens in the future. But that would be the extent of my comments on that particular issue.
Okay, so were you done?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let me go ahead and start the discussion. I hope to see more Christians willing to discuss the topic. So the first issue, really, I want to bring up here is the issue about Jesus turning water to wine. In the Bible, it says that you can have a little bit of alcohol for thy stomach's sake, but we know from science that that's not a good idea. When you have a population there, you just can't tell them, okay, go drink alcohol, because you got pregnant women, you got children in that population. So we know that even a small amount of alcohol could be disastrous for children to intake. We know from history that in Europe in medieval times, Christian children used to drink alcohol at the age 5 with mom and dad. It was called ale. Why? Well, Jesus turned water to wine. So we also know that pregnant women cannot have any alcohol, and this can lead to fetal alcohol syndrome, in the child. It is disastrous. Now the Quran comes, 600 years later, and completely bans alcohol in chapter 5, verse 90. So what we see here is that the Quran has literally obliterated a disease, which is fetal alcohol syndrome. And the question here is, the first question I have for you, I want to just take about 20 seconds of my time and tell me, why didn't the Bible do that, CJ?
Well, I think there are many reasons, to be honest with you. I think the first thing and most important thing that we need to address is that this is not actually a issue for science. It's an issue for morality. saying something along the lines of alcohol is good for you, alcohol is bad for you, alcohol does such and such to your body, that would be a question for science. Whether or not you are permissible, whether or not it is permissible, rather, to drink alcohol is actually not an issue for science. It's an issue for morality.
Okay, well, let me take my time back real quick. I just wanted to give you 20 seconds. Okay, so you're saying this is not an issue for science. I just explained to you and showed you. Well, of course, it's a moral issue as well as a scientific issue. Do you understand that that when a pregnant woman drinks, this is disastrous for a pregnant woman to be having to be drinking alcohol? Do you understand that?
Well, there's nowhere in the Bible that endorses pregnant women drinking alcohol, though, so it's a straw man.
Okay, so actually there is, because when Jesus turned water to wine, this is giving a green light. When the Bible says that you can drink some alcohol for thy stomach's sake, there's nothing. This is information giving to the general public. In the general public, they have they have pregnant women and they have children there. Okay, do you know of anything in the Bible that would stop them, or some kind of warning or something to let them know, hey, stop? No, not you girls. Is there anything in the Bible that would prevent that from happening?
Well, I would want to kind of wait until my own time, just because it would take me longer.
Exactly. His time, that 3-minute segment was up just now. So you have 3 minutes, CJ.
Absolutely. Thank you. So there would be a couple things that I would have to point out with that. The first thing, and certainly the most important thing, is that drunkenness is very clearly condemned all throughout the Bible. Likewise, sobriety is very clearly endorsed. Now, people will often claim, okay, yeah, but there is a strict prohibition of alcohol in Islam, and there's not a strict prohibition of alcohol in Christianity. So why wouldn't, if you wanted people to be sober, if you didn't want them to be drunk, why would you not just have a strict prohibition of alcohol? But the thing is that doesn't even make basic scientific sense for numerous reasons. For example, I assume Nadir Ahmed has taken NyQuil before. NyQuil absolutely has alcohol in it. It's just a fact. I assume many Muslims all across the world have eaten a rum cake before, something that will not get you intoxicated by any stretch, right? But it has the flavor of rum, or a beer batter fish, or something along those lines. And we could go on and on. There are actually numerous things that actually contain alcohol that wouldn't get you drunk at all. Listerine is a perfect example. Numerous forms of Novocaine and Benadryl are good examples, and we could go on and on with that. So it doesn't actually make any sense. It would make less medical sense to tell people no alcohol whatsoever than it would to tell people be sober and effectively drink responsibly. The other thing that I would point out is that it's just simply not true to say that the Quran has actually rejected this. And this is something I want to make clear, because this can kind of be a confusing topic. But, you see in Surah 590, O you who have believed, indeed intoxicants, gambling, sacrificing on stone altars to other than Allah, and divining arrows are but defilement. Sounds pretty strict, but if you move on to Surah 2, verse 219, it becomes less strict. They ask you about wine and gambling, say there is great sin, yet some benefit. Then you move on to Surah 443, and it becomes even less strict. We see, I have to kind of wait a little bit for my thing to pull up here, so I do apologize, but O you who have believed, do not approach prayer while you're intoxicated until you know what you are saying. And it continues. So now it's not that you can't drink, but rather it's that you can't drink while you're in prayer, and not necessarily explicitly can't drink while you're in prayer, but it just can't be so drunk that you don't actually know what you're saying. And then we can move on even further in Surah 1664, or actually, I don't know if it's 64, I believe it's 67. It says, and from the fruits of the palm trees and grapevines, you take intoxicants. If you read previous 3 verses, this is very clearly Allah telling people what he has blessed them with. And then lastly, you get even less strict in Surah 47:15, when Allah literally says, is the description of paradise which the righteous are promised, wherein are rivers of water unaltered, rivers of milk, the taste of which never changes, and rivers of wine delicious to those who drink. So we just need to point out that not only is this an issue for morality and not science, and not only is this not a scientific error, because indeed many medicines, many different things that people use all the time do contain small amounts of alcohol that could not possibly get you drunk, but also that it's just simply not true to say that Islam strictly condemns alcohol. In fact, Islam is horribly confusing on the topic.
That was 3 minutes. All right, thank you.
Okay, so I want you to take 10 minutes of my, I'm sorry, take 10 seconds of my time and show me, just because it seems like what you're doing, you're giving your own interpretation of the Quran that nobody in 1400 years has ever come up with. So my question for you, CJ, is there a Muslim theologian, scholar who you know of who has ever said wine and drinking alcohol is permissible in the Quran? Do you know of anyone like that?
Well, quite frankly, it's not relevant because it is
Okay,
explicitly
so
laid
there's
out in the
nobody.
Quran.
Do you know of anybody, any Muslim, who has ever come to these type of bizarre interpretations which you've given on the Quran? Is there
Well, hang
anyone
on.
you
No,
know
I have
of?
to stop you there, sir, because that's not true. This is not an interpretation. It says directly, rivers of wine delicious to those who drink. That is in the Quran. I'm reading out of the Sahih International Version, Surah
Right.
47:15.
That's in heaven, right?
Well, I just read you the other surahs, though, that were also out
The
of
context that context is in heaven. So is there anybody that you know of, let's say a Muslim, who has ever come to the conclusion that alcohol is permissible? Do you know of anybody?
well, I have certainly met Muslims who drink, if that is
Yeah,
your
no,
question.
but of course
Absolutely.
we all do bad stuff, right? Do you know of anybody like that? Okay. You do
Yeah, absolutely. I
understand that when
definitely
we
know.
look inside the Islamic world, before, of course, the colonization by the French and the British, alcohol was completely banned in every Islamic country. You could not even get a beer. Do you understand this part of history?
I would certainly question that part of history. There is substantial evidence that suggests that definitely people were drinking, especially during the Umayyad Empire, which was, as you know, considerably less
Okay,
strict with its
but my
interpretation of
point,
Islam.
so it's a very small pockets, but from mainstream, we see that really we're looking at 100% unanimous agreement that alcohol is forbidden, and because of that, it was removed from all of mainstream society. Sure, you might have like a small little party where some people have violated the laws. That of course has always happened, but we do agree it has been removed from mainstream society from Islamic societies. You would agree about this part of history, right? And what we know about the Islamic
Well,
world.
it certainly depends on the nation. Saudi Arabia, I'm
Yeah.
sure, has a very, very small
Okay,
alcoholism
so
problem. Iraq does not.
let me inform you, before the Islamic world became colonized by the French, British, and others in that, it has been totally removed. You could not find it. It would be very difficult to even find any. So based on what we know about the Quran and its prohibition of alcohol and how it influenced the Islamic world on that, how many children do you think the Quran has saved from fetal alcohol syndrome? Give me like a rough estimate. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't accept the premise of the question,
Mhm.
so I couldn't answer the question in an
So
honest fashion because I think it is
that,
clear.
yeah.
I've shown you here now in 5 different places of the Quran and Sahih International where it is very clearly not a strict prohibition of alcohol in Islam. So
But
I would
nobody
reject
has
the premise
ever
of the
came
question.
to this conclusion in the entire world but you. You are the only one with this interpretation, right? Would you agree with
That can't
that?
possibly be true, sir,
Okay,
because
name one person who has ever came to these type of conclusions.
sorry, is that so? Am I to continue, or I hear a beeping in the back?
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
go. It's your turn. It's your turn. Go ahead.
but you can pick up right there and answer the question that he asked you, and your time was beginning right now.
Absolutely, thank you. So I, like I said, would not be able to name specific Islamic scholars, but I don't think that is relevant. You could probably not find me a specific Christian scholar who has said that Jesus was never crucified. Nonetheless, you believe it, right? But that's not the point. The point is, what does the evidence suggest? And the evidence, even in Surah 590, the one that you quoted, I'll quote the entire thing from the Sahih International Version. "O you who have believed, indeed, intoxicants, gambling, sacrificing on those altars to other than Allah, and dividing arrows are but defilement from the work of Satan. Defilement from the work of Satan. So avoid it that you may be successful." Notice in the most strict verse as it pertains to alcohol in the Quran, rather, it is not a strict prohibition. It is rather a suggestion. Do this so that you may be successful. And this is something we absolutely positively need to understand when we see these later verses. I will quote Surah 2:219 again, once again from the Sahih International Version. "They ask you about wine and gambling. Say, in them is great sin, yet some benefit for the people, but their sin is greater than the benefit." Now, why would he be conceding that there's benefit in these things, right? And again, you move on. Surah 443 gets even less strict. "O you who have believed, do not approach prayer while you are intoxicated until you know what you are saying or are in a state of janaba," which of course is sexual purity, right? So you actually can be drunk so long as you are not sexually impure and know what it is that you're saying. You're not blacked out. You're not mumbling. You're not blah, 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 like drunk people tend to do. You know what I mean? And it continues. I mean, in Surah 16, 64 through 69, it explicitly says, and from the fruits of the palm trees and grapevines, you take intoxicants and good provisions. Indeed, in that is a sign for a people who reason. I'm quoting your scripture, Nadir. So I quite frankly, I don't think it's relevant what a scholar has to say about these situations. The language says what it says. And I, a non-scholar, and you, a scholar, can definitely both read this, and we will have to come to the same conclusion because it's just simply what it says. Anything else is, in fact, violation of the Quran when the Quran claims it's perfectly clear. And again, I would also point out to kind of get back to the Bible, right? The question here is indeed the Bible. It does not make any sense to strictly prohibit alcohol when you know, and God, of course, would, NyQuil will have alcohol in it. Listerine will have alcohol in it. Benadryl will have alcohol in it, so on and so forth. These are medicines. These are not things that people use to get drunk. And they're medicines that I am more than positive you've taken in your life because they work. We've proven scientifically that they work. I'll go ahead and see the rest of the 15 seconds because I really want to reiterate my point.
You said 15 seconds, so I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was okay.
Oh no, you're all right. I've made my point, and I'd like to give the floor back to Nadir.
Okay.
Yeah. So you mentioned that alcohol is the prohibition of alcohol was just a suggestion in the Quran. Is that what you said?
Yes, sir. In 590, it says
in 1400 years of history of Islam, have you ever known of any Muslim who's ever thought these things, or these are your own interpretations?
Isn't relevant. What people think about it does not change what the words say.
Okay. So when you said that wine, there is some benefit in it. There's a verse in the Quran which says wine, there is some benefit in it. The verse doesn't say go ahead and start drinking it, does it?
Well, to be fair, neither does the Bible. There's nowhere in the Bible that says, hey, grab a glass of wine. You know what I mean?
It does, actually. So the issue is this: there is verses in the Bible which says, "Take a little bit of wine for thy stomach's sake." There is. My point here is you are trying to make.
I'll concede that point. That is fair. But I do mean more in the sense of
let me take my point here. When the Quran says, "Do not come drunk to prayer," that doesn't mean you can start drinking. I mean, nobody in the entire Islamic world has ever spun these type of bizarre interpretations. Would you agree on that? Do not come to prayer when you are drunk.
Because the point is, Allah is telling me through his prophet Muhammad, I can be drunk and approach prayer so long as I know what I am saying.
Where does the text say you can be drunk? Listen, again, the problem here, CJ, you are just trying to bring the Quran where the Bible is, which gives basically a green light to drink alcohol. But let's go back to what we know from what we can say for sure from history. For at least we could say 99% of alcohol has been removed from all Islamic world before the colonization by the Europeans. That's a historical fact. So my question to you is, based on that, and since we all know that whether the Quran has convinced, we know for a fact the Quran has convinced 99.9%, if not 100% of all Muslims, stay away from alcohol. This is something bad. We know now whether they get weak and start drinking maybe a little bit on their own, they understand this is still wrong. We know that as a fact. So based on these two facts, how many children has the Quran saved from fetal alcohol syndrome? Just give about a rough estimate. Now, my atheist friend, he guessed right around, if you look at today in Islamic societies, it's right around 46,000. So he was crunching some numbers. So my question to you is, what number would you throw that out to be?
Well, once again, sir, I have to reject the premise of the question because first off, I would say you're making this claim that Islam has 99% eliminated alcoholism. I would just want to say
I didn't say alcoholism. I said removed it from mainstream society. We know from the Islamic world there was no bars and nightclub or places for that. I mean, you are. It seems like you are in denial of the facts that the Bible caused fetal alcohol syndrome. So you're trying to misrepresent the Quran to do some damage control. What it appears to be happening there.
And that was the 3 minutes on that segment. So go ahead, you can pick it up from there. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, sir. And I would point out that is just simply not the case. It's just simply not the case. There is no place in scripture, whether it's the 66 books or any of the alleged apocryphal books, no place at all where pregnant women are shown drinking, where children are shown drinking. It is made very clear in the Torah that the age of accountability is 14. And even then, there's a second age of accountability that is 20 when you join the military. And furthermore, it strictly condemns alcoholism, being drunk, being a drunkard. It strictly endorses sobriety. These are all just simply facts. And so it is not accurate whatsoever to say that the Bible has somehow caused fetal alcohol syndrome or children drinking. That's just not the case. But again, and we do need to get back to this point. You said that this was my interpretation. I'm going to quote it again, sir. "O you who have believed, do not approach prayer while," notice the while there, that means that there is something that is, that the sentence we're going to say is hanging off of the sentence, or the message we're trying to portray is hanging off of the next part of the sentence, right? While you are intoxicated, until, so once you reach this point, you are able to go to prayer until you know what you are saying. It did not say until you are sober. It did not say until you are completely without alcohol in your system, right? It just simply does not. It says, do not approach prayer while you are intoxicated until you know what you are saying. I can be perfectly frank with you, sir, and I do not drink, by the way. I believe that my Lord Jesus Christ does not approve of it. As far as, recreational drinking, I'll, have NyQuil and stuff like that. But I will tell you, sir, when I did drink, I absolutely have been smash drunk and been able to tell you what I was saying, nor have gotten in any sexual relations with any women. So, that's just something that I did as a teenager. Now, I know that's an antidote, but the point is there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of alcoholics and people who can drink far more than 15-year-old CJ Cox could, who are absolutely fully aware of what they're saying while they are smash drunk. Those are just facts. There's obviously a certain level where you do black out, where you stop knowing what you're saying, when you start mumbling and you start mixing sentences up and putting them in places they're not supposed to be. But the fact of the matter is, it's a person-to-person thing, and the Quran says very clearly, until you know what you are saying. So I can be very drunk so long as I know what I am saying, and of course am in a state of janaba, which is sexual purity. To be fair, let's go ahead and quote the entire verse so that you guys get the whole context. After it says in the state of janaba, actually, I'll just start from the beginning. "Oh, you who believe, do not approach prayer while you are intoxicated until you know what you are saying or in the state of janaba, except those passing through a piece of prayer until you have washed your whole body. And if you are ill on a journey or one of you comes from the place of relieving himself, or you have contacted women and find no water, then seek clean earth and wipe over your faces and your hands with it. Indeed, Allah is ever pardoning and forgiving." Right? So it is as clear as clear could possibly be. You only do not approach the prayers if you are so drunk that you do not know what you are saying. That's just what the words say. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter what anybody believes about that. That's what the words say.
Okay, CJ, that was 3 minutes.
Okay, CJ, the reason why it says that is because alcohol was gradually phased out. So basically, people were drinking, and then the Quran gradually started giving them bad news about alcohol till it finally became prohibited. This is 100% unanimously agreed upon all Muslims. So I think what you're doing, you're giving a CJ Cox interpretation of the Quran. And when you said, "Oh, you who believe, do not approach prayer while you are drunk," this is very important because even though alcohol is prohibited, people still drink alcohol. So they need to see this and say, okay, well, if you are not, the 5 times prayer is not relevant. You don't have to do it if you're drunk. People are still going to do it. And also because this is part of the phasing out. If you read the hadith, you'll see this is part of the phasing out process where alcohol was slowly abrogated. Are you familiar with this understanding of the Quran, CJ?
Yeah, the doctrine of abrogation, absolutely.
Yeah. And do you understand how alcohol was slowly, gradually prohibited? It didn't come out all at one time. It slowly gave bad news about it. There's good in it, but the evil outweighs the bad. Are you familiar with all of this?
Well, so I guess I would not be 100% familiar on the exact order. Okay. I know the first and I know the last as far as the order in which things were revealed.
This is because the reason why you find a verse which says, "Oh, you who believe, do not approach prayer while you're drunk." At this time, people were drinking alcohol, but now the Quran is now slowly restricting them till it finally came inside chapter 5, verse 90, where it says all alcoholic drinks are prohibited. And there's several hadith on this. And I think this is just a matter of education here, so you can start learning about abrogation, how Islam actually prohibited alcohol. And then we get to actually, if you read that, can you see your screen here?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
I
So
can't
in
see
the-
anything that you're putting up on the
Let me
screen, though.
let me read this to you. Okay, some drinks were presented to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he said, "All intoxicants are prohibited." When it was informed to him that there's a little bit of alcohol in it. Okay, so this is how alcohol finally was, phased out. It came through a gradual process, and I think you just didn't know about the law of abrogation. Now, I think you're also being a little bit naive here. You said something very troubling. You said that the Quran, the Bible doesn't really tell pregnant women to drink. Yes, it does. And let me explain how it does, how this works. Okay. And I'm surprised I actually have to explain this to you. When you tell a population of people, drink a little bit of alcohol for for thy stomach's sake, when you show them that Jesus turned water into wine, you say that to a population. Everyone in that population is going to think this is okay for them, from the children, the 5-year-old kids, as I was explaining to you, drinking alcohol, to the pregnant women. They're going to celebrate when they find out about their pregnancy and have a little bit of alcohol, because there's not, when you hear that message, you are going to think, okay, well, that's okay. That's for me. Do you understand this basic common sense over here, CJ? Do you have any
I
problem?
wouldn't say that is basic common sense. I think that you are calling it basic common sense, but it certainly is not. I challenge you, Nadir, find me one explicit verse that says, and such a woman who was known to be pregnant did drink. You won't find it.
There's no verse like that, but it's going to happen when you tell people, take a little bit of wine for thy stomach's sake. That's when a pregnant woman has some problem in her tummy, she's going to look at that and say, oh, well, hey, some alcohol is okay. You see, we know from history that for 1400, up till 1973, the whole Christian world was ignorant of the fact that the fetal alcohol syndrome was there. And we had no idea. And I think you are being very naive, and you're almost in a state of denial at this point, that you cannot understand, that you refuse to understand, that unless you specifically warn the pregnant women, hey, no, this is not for you, it's gonna happen. So let me ask you a question here. Are you telling us all here today that pregnant women and children were never influenced by the Bible to drink alcohol? That had never happened. Are you making this statement here for us tonight?
Well, I couldn't make any absolute claims, but of course you couldn't make any absolute claims right? in the opposite direction either. Yeah. Okay. Clearly, if I can reach this interpretation of the Quran, then somebody else can. I'm not, alone in that, for sure. Human beings are not that unique.
Yeah. The bizarre interpretations you gave about the Quran, I'm sure the entire Islamic world is laughing, because no one has ever looked at these verses and said, hey, let's all have a beer, because don't come to prayer when you're drunk. But anyways, I think this is your time. Go ahead, CJ.
Absolutely. So I want to point out something, because I did take the time. I was interested. I wanted to look up actually which verses came last and which ones came first. As you, of course, know, the chronological order of the Quran is not necessarily, the Quran is not necessarily set up in chronological order, but is set up by how many verses are actually therein. So from the shortest to the longest, or it might be the longest to the shortest, but that's not the point. So if we look here, we see Surah An-Nisa, right, which is where I am getting 443, is revealed in Medina, right? We see Surah Muhammad, where he promises in heaven rivers of wine, is in Medina, and so on and so forth. There's another one here I definitely did see just now that was also in Medina. And to be fair, Ma'idah is also in Medina. The point being, all of these are during the Medinan period of the Prophet Muhammad, right? So to say, well, this is clearly abrogating this and this is clearly abrogating the other, well, that's just simply not understanding the chronology of your own book. The fact of the matter is, many of these things were revealed one after the other, right next to each other, and sometimes, years apart, but with the verses that you don't like being revealed afterwards, right? I think the only one of these, and I could be wrong about this, so you guys would know better, correct me. I think the only one of these that is actually from the Meccan period of Muhammad's life would be Surah Al-Baqarah. And I could be wrong about that, which would be chapter or Surah 2, rather, for those of you who don't know the terminology. Other than that, all of these are from the Medinan period, which I think you and I would both agree is Muhammad at his most devout and at his most strict to the Islamic faith. Absolutely. Right. So to claim, well, these are abrogated because such and such a verse came afterwards, let's just simply ignoring what actually happened as far as the chronology of the revelation of these verses. Now, again, I want to make clear, because you keep saying this is my interpretation. I respect that your interpretation is different, sir, but this is not my interpretation. What it says is, "O you who have believed, do not approach prayer while you are intoxicated until you know what you are saying." That means if you are intoxicated but know what you are saying, you can approach prayer. That's just simply not disputable. Otherwise, the language does not mean what we think it means. And we really, I don't know why we're having this conversation if language doesn't mean what we think it means. You know what I mean? Clearly, language has objective communicative value. And the objective communicative value of this sentence is if you are not so drunk that you don't know what you're saying, and if you are in a state of sexual purity, then you are free to pray. And of course, like I said, in Surah An-Nahl, which is 16, and Surah Muhammad, which is 47, Allah goes as far as to say, not only did I bless you with the fruits that you are using for this, and that it is a sign for a people who reason that you use these fruits for alcohol, but also it's going to be in heaven everywhere, rivers of it, as a matter of fact. So it's just simply not the case to say there's strict prohibition of alcohol in the Quran.
Okay. And so, gentlemen, I just want to remind you, somehow the complete conversation has shifted entirely to the Quran, so it seems. Yeah. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I've kind of let the discussion develop how it has, but just a reminder to you, gentlemen, about that.
Okay. Let me take my time here. So you say that this is not my interpretation. You could not find a single person who could ever agree with your interpretations that the Quran is, allowing alcohol or something like that. And I don't think it ever will. What verse are you quoting where it said that do not come to prayer until you know what you are saying? Can you tell me what verse that is?
Absolutely. It is Surah 219.
Okay. Can you see
no, sorry, excuse me. That's not correct. It's Surah 443. 219 is another one I was using.
I'm sorry, what was it?
443.
Surah 440. I'm sorry, what is it?
443.
Chapter 4, verse 43, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It is Surah An-Nisa.
Yeah, An-Nisa. Okay, gotcha. And so it says, "O you who believe, do not approach prayer while you're intoxicated until you know what you are saying or in a state of janaba." So until you know what you are saying, again, this is the verse which I was explaining to you, which was abrogated. And so it was abrogated by chapter 5, verse 90. Have you read chapter 5, verse 90, which completely prohibited alcohol completely?
I did. I read it in this debate, actually, and I made sure to point out, it says, "So avoid it that you may be successful." It does not call it sinful.
Okay.
It simply says.
So when you say that this is the CJ interpretation of the Quran, we can at least agree this is just a CJ interpretation. In 1400 years, no one has ever came to these conclusions other than you based on our verses. But let's go on to the next scientific error. But to wrap up the problem of the Bible, we know that Jesus turning water to wine is a fabrication. This has led, because when you tell that to a population, this leads people, there's no warning to any pregnant women, there's no warning to any children. And this has caused irreversible and preventable brain damage in so many children here. This cannot be from God. Now, CJ, I think he's being naive. He's in denial. Well, the Bible doesn't say pregnant women specifically. It doesn't have to say that. It's going to happen. It misled them by telling them that take a little bit of wine for thy stomach's sake, and Jesus turning water to wine. It has caused so much suffering and damage in the world today. Now, of course, we cannot squeeze that confession out of CJ. He wants to say, oh, well, the Bible doesn't say pregnant women drink alcohol. But I think everybody can see here that he's just being naive. So the next scientific error here, which has led to the suffering of human, is a rule of divorce. Inside chapter 4, I'm sorry, inside what's it called? The chapter 5, verse 32. Divorce was Matthew chapter 5, verse 32. If I got that verse right, divorce is only allowed in terms of adultery and death. But we know now from science, divorce is allowed in many instances. There could be incompatibility, the man was bad, domestic violence, etc. So how do you explain a 16-year-old girl getting married now has to, and gets divorced, and she has to live single the rest of her life? How do you
Okay,
explain that?
that was 3 minutes. So go ahead, CJ. You have 3 minutes.
Absolutely. So I want to have a few comments on the last part, and then I want to move on to the new objection that Nadir has brought up. So first thing I do want to point out, 1 Peter 5, verses 8 through 9, be sober-minded is the very first word, or the very first words, rather, of 1 Peter. So the Bible is very clear in endorsing sobriety. Paul also endorses it. Solomon also endorses it, says those who tarry long at the wine are those who have sorrow. So it's just simply not the case to say this is a full endorsement of everybody going on drinking, celebrating, and singing Kumbaya. That's not true, right? And once again, when it says, well, take a little wine for your stomach, Nadir, have you ever had NyQuil? Have you ever had Benadryl? Have you ever had Novocaine, which has cocaine in it, right? Have you ever taken any sort of painkiller, which has things like morphine and so on and so forth? I can go on. The fact of the matter is a strict prohibition of alcohol would be more scientifically detrimental than telling people alcohol is okay, but make sure you are sober. Because, sober is a pretty strict thing. It only takes roughly 2 or 3 beers to get outside of the realm of sober. In fact, for many people, like a lot of Native Americans and things like that, it takes 1 single beer or glass of wine to start getting buzzed and to no longer be sober. So this is just simply not the case. The Bible is very clear in its endorsement of sobriety, and I think we can leave that there. Now, as far as the situation is concerned with marriage, I must be honest, I'm a little shocked that this is in the conversation, and I was shocked that it was in the list you sent me as well. It's just simply not a question for science. It's just simply put, not a question for science. It is a question of morality. What is God's moral view as it pertains to divorce? It's not, there is no scientific error in saying you can divorce for this reason or not divorce for this reason. That is a moral question. It has absolutely nothing to do with science. Furthermore, I would like to point out, and this is something that we are going to have to continuously go back to over the course of this conversation. The Quran is very clear in its support, in its endorsement of specifically 10 books of the Bible. Those are the book of Psalms, the Gospel, and the Torah. The Torah, of course, including the first 5, and the Gospel, including the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And it also explicitly endorses the Psalms as well. In other words, because of the fact that we find every single one of your objections in either the Gospel or the Torah, as a Muslim, you don't actually have the right to make those objections because you're contradicting your very own scriptures. Specifically, Surah 7, 157. There's numerous places in Surah 5, verses 40 through 49. I believe 43 and 47 are going to be the ones that you want to look at, and so on and so forth. So to kind of reiterate my point, this is not a question for science. It's a question for morality. God is the only one who truly gives morality, and therefore I'm going to concede that his point is correct in this issue. And the Quran is very clear in its endorsement of the Torah and the Gospel.
Okay, and that was 3 minutes. Okay, Nadir.
Okay, so we're not talking about drunkenness. Nobody cares about drunkenness. That's not the issue. We're talking about taking a little bit of alcohol, which we know has caused, the Bible has caused so much suffering, and has, if this was really written by God, he would have known that there are pregnant women you're giving this message to. You see, when you got that population of people, you got pregnant women, children, and when you tell them, yeah, take a little bit of alcohol for thy stomach's sake, God would have known that. And this is, we see from the Quran. The Quran clearly condemns alcohol, and the CJ interpretation, which he's giving you, the CJ interpretation of the Quran, we can safely say that thank God Allah protected Muslims from that ridiculous interpretation. And we can look through history, and nobody has ever came to those. I mean, can't say nobody. I'm sure maybe 1 in a million has ever came to these conclusions. So we are very safe there. We've shown you from the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It doesn't get any more clear than this. All intoxicants, when alcohol was made, alcoholic drinks was presented to him, he said all intoxicants are prohibited it is wrong. But at the same time, people are still going to come drunk and they're still going to drink. That's why the Quran says, and don't come to your prayer while you're intoxicated, etc. So I hope you can. This is something which all Muslims unanimously agree, and I think CJ, you just need to study the Quran a little bit more on this. So let's see. Let's talk about what you just said here. So a 16-year-old girl, let's say, who gets divorced, didn't work out. The guy turned out to be a jerk. And the Bible says now she must remain single for the rest of her life. Do you endorse this, CJ? Take 10 seconds of my time.
Absolutely, it's the word of God.
Okay, so you believe that she should remain single for the rest of her life, right?
100%, yes.
Okay. All right. Need to take a second here. So if you look at this level of human suffering, not just inside the pregnant women, I mean, and how the Bible called these women to be to drink alcohol, and that a blanket statement like that is not right. We see that, look at the level of suffering of human beings. Now, the Quran comes and corrects a second scientific error of the Bible. The first one was the prohibition of alcohol. The second one is the Quran now allows divorce for women, and there's no specific condition. You can, if you don't like the guy, you can get divorced. And so we can look, and I think everybody I ask this question to, they all know somebody who lives their life like this, where they got divorced, and that's it. They will never remarry because they think the Bible tells them to do so. So the good thing about the Quran, I want to show you how it alleviates the suffering caused by the biblical scientific errors. Go ahead.
Okay.
Certainly. So there are a few points once again to address. I do just want to make clear. I mean, we keep going back to this alcohol thing, sir. I have not given you an interpretation. I have read to you the words and then simply told you that I'm reading you the words. In fact, I've even gone as far as to give you the specific verse so you could look it up for yourself and not have to trust me or the Sahih International Version from Quran.com. So there's just simply no debate as to what the Quran actually says. Furthermore, I want you to tell me specifically, would you forbid your children from having any Listerine, from having any Benadryl, from having any Novocaine, from having any NyQuil, or any of those sorts of things that have little itty bitty amounts of alcohol in it, but actually turn out to be incredibly beneficial? The obvious answer, of course, would probably be no. But I want to go ahead and let you answer. Would you reject use of NyQuil entirely and Benadryl and things like that?
So in Islam, when it comes to saving your life, the alcohol, pork, whatever it may be, that all becomes permissible. So I would absolutely let them have this, whatever it may be, and that's 100% unanimously attested among all Muslims. So yes, I would let them have that to save your life.
Agree then that when Paul says use this for your stomach, because he's saying use it medicinally, and he's already made clear to be sober, so you can't drink a lot of it. You basically just conceded that is actually okay, and that you indeed would do it because you would take things like NyQuil and things like that.
That's a scientific error.
How is that a scientific error? Is NyQuil,
because if you have a tummy ache, it could be pregnancy. It could be that maybe you ate too much. There's could be so many reasons for a stomach ache, and no doctor would sit here and tell a pregnant woman to have a little bit of alcohol. That is just a disaster.
Well, like, you keep throwing in pregnant women. It doesn't say pregnant women.
Among the population, there are pregnant women in the population is talking to. It does. The Bible doesn't say men, but yet men drink it. The Bible doesn't say women, but yet women. It's for both. See, it doesn't have to. It's giving this message to the population. You're just in denial of the fact that it gave a remedy to a population of people which consists of women and children, and that's disastrous. And you are in denial of that.
Women and children drink NyQuil, sir.
Yeah, that's a disaster. Yeah.
So you would not give your children NyQuil ever?
A pregnant woman, no. And
no, not your children. To be fair, the NyQuil with pregnant
women. Once I read it, got alcohol.
Take it. But
once I read it's got alcohol in there, I won't give it to them. Now, if there's a life-saving morphine or something like that, then yes, absolutely. There's many people who don't do that. In fact, when a woman gets pregnant, they specifically tell them, the doctors tell them, hey, you don't want to take alcohol-based drugs and stuff like that. So even today, pregnant women don't drink NyQuil, and children shouldn't either.
All right, so I just want it to be stated for the record that you have said earlier in this debate that it is absolutely okay to take things like NyQuil, and now you are saying that it is not okay for children and pregnant women in particular.
I said to save your life. Yes, you can take the things which are prohibited. Correct. To save your life.
As long as we have that established, I think the people can actually deduce for themselves at that point. So let's move on to the marriage then. You say that the Quran allows divorce in any and all circumstances. I would consider that to be morally abominable. I must be perfectly frank with you. I think that that's horrid. The fact of the matter is, if you can divorce somebody for any old reason, then you are opening the door to divorcing people because you happen to think that the person's abs next to you are a lot nicer than your husband's. So if it's any old reason, then even absolutely ridiculous reasons count. So I want to point that out. I also want to point out, and you know this, sir, Surah 434 clearly and obviously allows Muslim men to strike their wives. So if
no,
you're
no, we're not going to go there, Kenny. We gotta end right here because it's 5 o'clock, and my wife has to go to work here. So they're talking about trying to bring up women beating and all that. That is ridiculous. But thank you, CJ. It's been a very interesting discussion. I wish you would change your mind on divorce. There's no need to have people suffer like that. But I got to get going.
Okay.
Okay.
Nadir?
I gotta go.
So thank you, gentlemen. If we need to do a part 2 on this, we can certainly set that up, inshallah, God willing. So CJ, thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure having you on. Matter of fact, follow us on Consider This TV, and maybe we can have you on again on the panel at some point along the way, God willing. Okay.
Absolutely. And if I may just quickly add, I do accept Nadir's debate for scientific errors in the Quran if he is wanting to have it. And if we want to have a part 2, let's go ahead and throw, he gave me a list of scientific errors. Let's go ahead and throw the virginity test and the mustard seed in those 2, since we've already addressed 2.
Okay. So we'll try to set that up, God willing. Okay. So inshallah. So thank you, brother, for coming on. And you've been an absolute gentleman. No doubt about it. So, okay.
You as well. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a good one. Okay. So that was a discussion between Nadir Ahmed and CJ Cox on, it was supposed to be whether or not the Bible contradicted science, but it seemed that most of the conversation turned to the Quran. So we'll have to see if we can bring these guys back on to finish this conversation. Nadir did tell me that he had his wife had to be done by 5 p.m. his time, Eastern Standard Time. It's 4 p.m. here, so yeah, he's in Florida. So yeah, very interesting, very interesting. So okay, so everyone, anyway, thank you for watching. I'm just looking at comments in the chat, but so yeah, thank you everyone for watching, and we have some other big things coming up, inshallah, coming soon. So tomorrow, matter of fact, we have Reasons to Revert. We're going to be interviewing a revert to Islam from Australia, and so be tuning into that at about 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we'll see you soon, inshallah. I do bear witness there's no God other than Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his final servant and the seal of all prophets. Assalamu alaikum, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.